it was a great movie, but
Yeah.
it seemed like there was resistance to that movie.
Mel Gibson was on the Joe Rogan podcast talking about the sequel to The Passion of the Christ.
It was a great movie, but it seemed like there was resistance to that movie. Mel Gibson was on the Joe Rogan podcast talking about the sequel to The Passion of the Christ. What if the most controversial film of the century contained secrets that nobody was meant to discover? When Mel Gibson sat down with Joe Rogan, something extraordinary happened. Music. The conversation started casually enough, touching on filmmaking, faith, and Hollywood politics. But then Gibson began revealing what really happened behind the scenes of The Passion of the Christ. And suddenly the room went still. Rogan, a man who has interviewed presidents, fighters, and whistleblowers, was visibly shaken. This wasn't marketing. This wasn't controversy for clicks. Gibson was pulling back a curtain that Hollywood had fought desperately to keep closed. And once you understand what everyone missed about this film, you'll never see it the same way again. The story nobody wanted told. To understand what Gibson exposed, we need to go back to the beginning. The Passion of the Christ was never meant to be just another biblical epic. Gibson wasn't interested in sweeping cinematography and predictable storytelling. He wanted something raw, something visceral, something that would grab audiences by the throat and refuse to let go until they truly understood what sacrifice actually means. It was like you're making this film, and the idea was music, that we're all responsible for this, that his sacrifice was for all mankind. Music, as Gibson explained to Rogan, the entire point was that we're all responsible music for this. That Christ's sacrifice wasn't just a historical event, but something with present-day implications for every music single person watching. He spent years studying the four Gospels, diving into every verse about the final hours of Jesus Christ's life. But he went deeper than most filmmakers would dare. He pulled from ancient texts, music, and theological sources, weaving together not just the events themselves, but the weight behind them, the spiritual warfare, the human cost, the divine purpose hidden within every moment of suffering. The opening scene tells you exactly what kind of film this is. We're in the Garden of Gethsemane, darkness pressing in, Jesus kneeling in prayer while his closest companions fall asleep around him. The vulnerability is overwhelming. Here is someone fully divine, yet fully human, sweating music drops of blood as an unbearable weight crushes down upon him. Then Satan appears, slithering through shadows, whispering doubts. A serpent emerges, music, but Jesus crushes it beneath his heel, a direct callback to Genesis and the very first promise of redemption. Every single frame carries meaning. Every shadow is deliberate. Every line of dialogue resonates with theological depth that rewards music, those paying close attention. This wasn't a film designed for casual viewing. Gibson created cinema that demands you lean forward, engage deeply, and reckon with something far larger than yourself. Her name was Nefertiti. You've seen her face. That famous painted bust with the long neck and the knowing smile. She was Tut's stepmother, wife of the heretic pharaoh Akhenaten. And after her husband died, she did something unprecedented. Some scholars have begun to suggest that actually this may not belong to him at all, or it may not originally have been made for Shakamun. She may have seized the throne herself, ruling Egypt as pharaoh under a new name. Then she vanished completely. Her tomb has never been found. Her mummy has never been identified. She simply disappears from history, like someone erased her on purpose. Here's what made researchers nervous. Music. If Nefertiti died before Tut, and if she had her own burial mass prepared, and if Tut died suddenly with nothing ready, the math worked out perfectly. The pierced ears made sense. The feminine features made sense. The rushed modifications made sense. But proving music, it was impossible. You'd have to damage the mask to look inside. And nobody was going to let that happen. For decades, the Nefertiti theory remained exactly that. Whispered about at conferences, dismissed by the establishment, impossible to prove. Then in 2014, someone broke the mask. And that accident would eventually expose everything. The disaster that changed everything. The story made international headlines. During a routine cleaning at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, a worker bumped the mask. The long braided beard, A sacred symbol of divine kingship snapped clean off. What happened next was almost worse than the break itself. Instead of calling expert conservators, museum staff panicked. Music, they grabbed the first adhesive they could find. Epoxy, industrial-strength glue meant for plumbing and car repairs. They globbed it on, shoved the beard back, and prayed nobody would notice. Everyone noticed. They had even smeared glue visibly on the golden chin. Music, Egypt's greatest treasure, which had survived for 33 centuries, had been damaged by hardware store adhesive. The Egyptian government brought in an international team led by German conservator Christian Ekman. His job was to fix the beard properly. But Ekman saw an opportunity. Before reattaching anything, he would scan the mask with X-ray fluorescent technology. He would answer the Nefertiti question once and for all. His logic was solid. If the face had been cut from another mask and soldered onto this one, music, the XRF scan would show it. Different gold compositions, solder lines, chemical signatures of alteration. His team spent months scanning every millimeter. The results seemed definitive. Music, the gold in the face, matched the gold in the headdress. The hieroglyphs spelling Tutankhamun showed no evidence of being carved over another name, and the delicate glass inlays around the eyes were perfectly intact. If anyone had soldered a new face on, the heat would have cracked that glass instantly. Case music closed. The Nefertiti theory was dead. The mask was 100% Tuts. Ekman's team removed the epoxy and reattached the beard with beeswax music, just like the ancient Egyptians would have used. It had been glued back together, but needed further repair work after images surfaced online showing a line of glue around its chin. The mask went back on display. The history book stayed the same. But here's the thing. A small group of scientists didn't music by it. They argued that Ekman's technology had a fatal blind spot. Music X-rays can see density. They can spot cracks and solder joints. But what if the ancient craftsmen were smarter than that? Music. What if they used gold from the same batch to plug the ear holes? What if they hammered the original name perfectly flat before recarving? Music. What if they attached a new face so precisely that the seam was only a few atoms thick? X-rays would see nothing. They can't read the history of metal. They can't tell the difference between gold that was poured once music and gold that was reheated, hammered, and reworked. To see that, you'd need a completely different kind of technology, something that could read the thermal memory of atoms themselves. And by 2024, that technology existed. The scan that changed history. Dr. Helene Voss is a materials physicist at the Max Planck Institute in Munich. Her specialty is quantum resonance imaging, a technology so new it barely exists outside classified laboratories. In late 2024, her team secured permission from the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities to perform a non-invasive scan of the mask. Officially, it was a calibration test. They wanted to prove their equipment worked on ancient gold. They weren't expecting to find anything Ekman had missed. The scan took place after the Grand Egyptian Museum closed for the night. Dr. Voss later described the setup to colleagues. The scanner hummed. The mask sat motionless under the beam. Data streamed onto laptops in real time. For hours, everything confirmed what they already knew. Then the scanner focused on the Kartu, the oval containing Tutankhamun's name. Dr. Ahmed Hassan, an Egyptologist from Cairo University who was present that night, said the room went dead silent. On the screen, beneath the carved hieroglyphs, the quantum imager was showing something else. A pattern of atomic displacement that shouldn't exist. Evidence that the gold in that exact spot had been hammered, scraped, and reworked in ways found nowhere else on the mask. Dr. Voss asked the technician to run the scan again. Same result. She asked him to recalibrate. Same result. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a metallurgist from Kyoto University who joined the team remotely, later said she couldn't process what she was seeing. The data was unambiguous. Someone had beaten the original hieroglyphs into oblivion and carved new ones over them. But that wasn't the most disturbing finding. Not even close. The ghost beneath the gold. The team ran a full structural analysis. What they found dismantled a century of assumptions. First, the ears. The X-rays showed solid gold. The quantum scan showed something different. Two perfect cylindrical plugs. Someone had filled the original pierced holes with rods of identical gold alloy, then hammered and polished them until the seams were invisible to any technology that existed before 2024. The ears had been plugged. The mask originally belonged to someone who wore earrings. Second, the face. The quantum imager detected what Dr. Voss called thermal ghosting around the entire perimeter, where the face meets the headdress. This is a molecular signature. It means the gold along that exact outline had been superheated to a different temperature than the surrounding metal. This was hopefully going to be the only intact royal burial ever found in the Valley of the Kings. The ancient craftsmen hadn't soldered from the front. That would have cracked the glass. They'd attached the new face from behind using high-pressure heating that left the visible surface flawless. The seam was invisible to X-rays, but the atoms remembered the face had been cut out and replaced. The room was silent for a long time. Dr. Hassan was the first to speak. He asked if the scanner could reconstruct what had been erased. Dr. Voss said yes. By mapping the microscopic traces of the original hammering, the ghostly impressions of the first inscription, the computer could digitally rebuild what had once been carved there. She initiated the program. The reconstruction took 11 minutes. Slowly, the original hieroglyphs materialized on screen. Dr. Tanaka, watching from Kyoto, said nobody breathed. The name emerged one symbol at a time. It was not Tutankhamun. The name was Nefer-Neferuaten, the throne name historians believe Nefertiti used when she became pharaoh. During his conversation with Rogan, Gibson revealed something that most people never talk about openly. Music, something that explains why this film faced such extraordinary resistance from the very beginning. He noticed a pattern within the industry, a double standard that operated silently but effectively. Films exploring various religious traditions often received respectful treatment, nuanced portrayals, careful music handling. But when it came to Christian stories, the response was fundamentally different. Skepticism, dismissal, sometimes outright hostility. Christianity is the one religion that you're allowed to disparage. Yeah. Christianity is the one religion where they'll embrace all these different religions until it comes to Christianity. Projects were labeled old-fashioned, music too serious, out of touch with modern audiences. The assumption was always that nobody wanted to see music, this kind of content anymore. Gibson experienced this resistance personally and painfully. Studios that should have been fighting to finance a project from an Oscar-winning director suddenly went cold. Phone calls went unanswered. Meetings were canceled. Colleagues who had worked alongside him for years started keeping their distance. The message couldn't have been clearer. This particular story wasn't welcome, and neither was the filmmaker Try Music to tell it. The industry didn't just doubt the commercial viability. They actively opposed the content itself. But Gibson Music refused to walk away. His Catholic upbringing meant this wasn't just professional ambition. It was personal mission. When traditional funding dried up, he financed the project himself. He assembled a team of believers who shared his vision and weren't intimidated by controversy. What emerged from that crucible of opposition shocked everyone. The Passion of the Music Christ became one of the highest-grossing R-rated films in history, proving that millions of viewers were starving for exactly the kind of bold, uncompromising storytelling that Hollywood executives insisted nobody wanted. Supernatural events that defied explanation. The making of this film was anything but ordinary. What Gibson shared with Rogan moved into territory that sounds almost impossible to believe. Events occurred on set that the crew still cannot explain to music this day. Jim Caviezel, cast as Jesus, endured genuine physical suffering that translated to the screen in ways no special effects could replicate. The cross he carried weighed over 30 pounds. During one take, it dislocated his shoulder completely. During the scourging scene, he was struck twice by the actual whips. Once so hard it knocked the wind from his lungs, leaving his hands bleeding and raw. His pain wasn't performance. It was absolutely real. And that authenticity music bleeds through every frame of the finished film. Then came the lightning. Assistant director John Michelini was struck twice during filming. Cazale himself was reportedly struck during the crucifixion scene, yet walked away, miraculously, unharmed. The Passion, while I was electric struck by lightning on the last shot of the movie, but prior to that it was shoulder dislocation. Lightning in biblical music, tradition, represents divine power and judgment. It appears at pivotal moments throughout Scripture. The crew couldn't explain what was happening around them. These incidents created an atmosphere where the boundary between natural music and supernatural felt dangerously thin. People started wondering if something beyond ordinary filmmaking was taking place. Transformations extended beyond the physical realm. Luca Lionel, who portrayed Judas's Music Iscariot, entered production as an atheist. By the time filming wrapped, he had become a believer, profoundly changed by spending months exploring themes of betrayal and redemption. Maya Morgenstern, who played Mary, was secretly pregnant during filming, a quiet symbol of music, life and death, resurrection, and renewal, intertwined with the very story she was helping tell. Gibson also shared reports of unexplained healings. A young girl with severe epilepsy went an entire month without seizures after being present during filming. Others reportedly experienced restored music senses. Whether these were divine interventions, remarkable coincidences, or psychological transformations, the cast and crew walked away convinced they had participated in something far greater than a movie production. One scene perfectly captures Gibson's artistic vision. After the crucifixion, Jesus' body rests in Mary's arms, music echoing Michelangelo's famous Pieta. The composition captures grief and grace simultaneously, devastation, music, and dignity, human sorrow, and divine purpose. It transcends religious tradition to speak to universal experiences of love, loss, and hope. Critics divided, audiences transformed. When The Passion of the Christ finally reached theaters, critical response was sharply divided. Roger Ebert, arguably the most influential film critic of his generation, awarded it a perfect 4 stars, calling it the most violent and intense film he had ever witnessed. Ebert wrote that he had never truly understood the depth of Christ's suffering until experiencing Gibson's music unflinching portrayal. Roger Ebert, as much as he loved to praise and celebrate good films, he also loved to point out their flaws. Other respected critics praised the film's sincerity and artistic ambition, comparing Gibson's directorial vision to masters of spiritual cinema. Yet, controversy arrived from multiple directions. Before the film's release, religious leaders reviewed the script and expressed serious concerns. They worried that certain portrayals could reinforce dangerous historical stereotypes that had fueled anti-Semitism for centuries. These weren't frivolous objections. History showed how such narratives had been weaponized to justify persecution and violence. Gibson maintained that his intent was to show humanity's collective responsibility for Christ's death, not to single out any group. But the debate highlighted how fraught any retelling of this story inevitably becomes. Scholars noted that Gibson included scenes without direct biblical basis, like Judas tormented by demonic children. Gibson's response was straightforward. This was artistic interpretation, meant music to convey spiritual truths, not documentary recreation. He used cinematic language, symbolism, and visual metaphor to explore themes of guilt, redemption, and spiritual warfare. The film walked a tightrope between historical music representation and theological meditation. Different viewers brought radically different expectations and left with radically different experiences. Some found it spiritually transformative. Others found it problematic. Almost nobody walked away neutral. The intensity of debate only amplified public interest. People who would never normally consider religious films felt compelled to judge for themselves. Church groups organized mass viewings. Religious leaders delivered sermons analyzing its implications. Media outlets ran countless stories dissecting every frame. Gibson had created music, something that absolutely refused to be ignored. The Resurrection Project. Gibson isn't finished exploring these themes. In fact, he's only getting started. During his interview with Rogan, he revealed that for 6 to 7 years, he and screenwriter Randall Wallace have been developing something even more ambitious. Music, a film about the resurrection, told not through conventional linear storytelling, but as a cosmic exploration of the eternal battle between good and evil. Gibson described the project as incredibly ambitious. It spans from the fall of the angels to the death of the last apostle. This isn't a simple sequel. Music, it's an expansion into territory that mainstream cinema has never truly attempted. Gibson wants to show how that singular moment in history, the resurrection, connects to everything before and after. He's diving into ancient texts, theological debates, and historical research to craft music, a narrative that challenges audiences to see familiar stories through entirely new eyes. For him, the Gospels' music aren't mythology. They're history evidenced by the unwavering testimony of the apostles, all of whom died rather than deny music what they witnessed. As Gibson asked Rogan directly, who dies for something they know is a lie? That question alone, he believes, validates the supernatural claims at the very heart of Christianity. The resurrection remains the most challenging aspect of faith for many people. Music, someone executed, buried, and then walking out of a tomb, defies the natural order completely. Gibson admits that for music much of his life, he accepted these claims because others believed them. But over time, he sought music, his own understanding. That personal journey now shapes everything he creates. He isn't interested in preaching to the converted or producing music content that confirms existing beliefs. He wants skeptics and believers alike to wrestle with profound questions about existence, music meaning, and what happens when life ends. What everyone missed. Music. So, what's the hidden truth that shook Joe Rogan? What brought visible emotion to a man known for his composure? It wasn't a single revelation. It was the weight of everything combined. The truth that creating the Passion of the Christ music required Gibson to stand virtually alone against an industry that wanted this music story buried forever. The truth that supernatural events occurred during filming that defy any rational music explanation. The truth that art created with genuine conviction can transform lives in ways music commercial entertainment never will. The truth that faith sometimes demands suffering. That speaking honestly means risking everything you've built. That some stories justify any sacrifice required to tell them. These truths cut through the noise of our cynical age. They reminded Rogan and his millions of listeners that sincerity still exists in a world dominated by calculation and image management, that people still create art for reasons beyond profit, that conviction still moves mountains, music, and that sometimes the most controversial stories are exactly the ones most desperately needing to be heard. Gibson's journey represents something increasingly rare, a complete refusal to compromise. A refusal to play it safe, a refusal to let industry music gatekeepers dictate which stories deserve telling and which should be silenced forever. The Passion of the Christ forces viewers' music to confront uncomfortable realities about suffering, sacrifice, and redemption. It offers no easy answers or comfortable reassurances. Instead, it demands that we wrestle with difficult questions about human nature, divine purpose, music, and the price of salvation. Questions most entertainment actively avoids. More than 2 decades after its release, Music, the film remains divisive. Some view it as an absolute masterpiece of spiritual cinema. Others see it as deeply problematic. Both perspectives contain elements of validity. Great art provokes strong reactions, precisely music, because it touches something deep within us, something we cannot easily dismiss or categorize. The conversation between Gibson and Rogan revealed layers of truth that most celebrity interviews never even approach. It showed us that behind every controversial work lies a human story of struggle, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment to vision. It reminded us that reality contains mysteries we music cannot fully explain through materialist frameworks. And it demonstrated that authentic vulnerability, even from tough and controversial figures, holds genuine power to move hearts and open minds. That's what everyone missed about the Passion of the Christ. It wasn't just a movie. It was a man betting everything on a story the world tried to silence, music, and winning. The hidden truth isn't hidden anymore. It's there for anyone willing to look, to listen, and to let themselves be transformed by stories that actually matter. Stories, music that cost something real.